Welcome, everyone. It's another beautiful day of the Becoming a Peaceful Parent Summit. And I'm really on a mission to help parents be patient, present, and loving with their kids. That's what the summit is all about. And I'm super excited because today I have a very, very special guest. Her name is Debbie Reber. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for you to be part of this summit and contributing to this conversation. Just a couple words about Debbie. She's a New York best-selling author, also absolutely amazing parenting activist. She's the founder of Tilt Parenting, which really helps parents and gives support to parents who have differently wired kids. And we'll talk a little bit more about what all that means. She's really dedicated her life into this cause, and she's got several books out there, podcast, just a lot of generosity, a lot of giving to this very important cause, and an area where so much information and support is needed because differently wired kids and their parents feel a little out of sorts in this world that is not really designed for them. And oftentimes what happens is like it's rather than the school, for example, adjusting to the child, we expect the child to adjust to the school. And with some of these kids who are not neurotypical, this is very challenging. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So welcome to this show. And I kind of want to start with this idea that you have as differently wired, and you have your book out there, Differently Wired, Raising an Exceptional Child in a Conventional World. Can you talk to us a little bit about what do you mean by differently wired? What's different?
Well, I really wanted to come up with a phrase that captured this idea that there are many ways to move through the world that may in the past have been considered to not be normal.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you're raising a child who has some sort of neuro difference or multiple differences, whether that's ADHD or a learning disability, or maybe they're gifted or they're on the autism spectrum or sensory processing issues, we get these labels that kind of scream at us, there's a problem here, there's something wrong, something that needs to be fixed. And I had kind of two goals when I thought about this term differently wired. One is to kind of group us together because there are so many of us whose kids are neurodivergent. And when we're kind of separated in different buckets or silos by diagnoses, then we're not kind of recognizing there's actually a lot of us and we're part of this huge community. And then I also wanted to use a phrase that felt positive and optimistic and recognize that there is no such thing as normal. And actually, there's nothing wrong with our children. They're not broken in need of fixing. They are moving through the world differently, and they have just as much a right to experience the world the way they do as any other child does.
Right, absolutely. And so bringing people together rather than being marginalized or on the edges of the society, because it's like you said, it's a large number of people, of adults that are actually, process things differently.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get statistics because of stigma, and a lot of people don't have diagnoses or they don't want to share that. But a very, very conservative estimate would be that 1 in 5 people is differently wired, but I believe the number is much higher than that.
Right. So I love that you have created this movement. So what got you started? What got you really interested and passionate about that? I'd love to hear about that a little bit.
Well, it wasn't my plan, I'll just say. I didn't
Right, it's never the plan, right? It's always just kind of happens. The life kind of veers us into this direction. So tell us about that.
Well, I have had many careers, including one where I worked in kids television for a number of years. And then for about 15 years, I was actually writing books and advocating for young women and teenagers. And because I was a recovering teen myself, and that's just kind of where my heart led me to work with that population. And then I became a parent and wasn't raising a teen girl. In fact, I was raising a neurodivergent boy. And as I kind of learned more about who he was and navigated this path, which there was no path, I discovered over time, because the traditional paths that I assumed we'd be moving down regarding school and other rites of passage were not really unfolding the way I was expecting. My son has pretty severe ADHD. He's profoundly gifted. He at one point had a diagnosis of being on the autism spectrum and sensory issues, just a lot going on. And when I was going through this, when he was quite young, there really wasn't much support for parents like me. There were very few resources. They were hard to navigate. And so my husband and I felt really alone in all of this. We felt overwhelmed. We felt isolated. We felt like we didn't know where to turn. We wondered if we were going crazy because we just didn't even know how to forge a path. So over time, as I kind of really dived into who my child was and immersed myself in this body of work and that exists for kids like him, I decided I'm going to take all my skills of writing and creating content and creating community and sharing, and I'm going to pivot and serve parents like me, because again, there are so many of us, and it's just not okay that we're feeling that we're in this alone and that there's something wrong with our child.
Right, absolutely. It is not okay. And you've created such a beautiful resources and community. And I hear that your message is, it's not only about let's accept these children, let's accept the parents, let's embrace that. But you actually say that the world needs kids and people who are differently wired, that this world will actually be a better place because of that. Could you talk a little bit more about that, and what do you mean by that?
Well, these kids have incredible gifts. So when a child is differently wired, the status quo is to kind of focus on their deficits. This is a problem, we need to work on this.
Right.
And that is the approach in most school settings, and that is the societal approach. We need to get these kids to better fit in. But when you consider the fact that being an unconventional thinker means that you are going to approach problems differently, you're going to see things in a much different way than normal or most people would. There are many learning disabilities or differences like dyslexia and dysgraphia that can make reading and some other things really challenging, but can also give you these incredible abilities to flip images in your mind. And so a lot of these people become graphic designers. There's attention to detail. There's these hypersensitive kids. These are all gifts. And when you think about the problems that we as a world are facing, Greta Thunberg is such a wonderful example now of how looking at a problem differently and really taking that passion, this deep empathy and passion that so many of these kids experience, and harnessing that, there's so much potential for what they can contribute. And so I'm just going to tell you, my cat is about to walk into frame here, so you'll get to meet Alex.
Welcome.
But I think we have so much to lose when you think about these kids who have such gifts, and when they are given the message time and time again that there's something wrong with who they are, the potential for what we're going to lose is really tremendous, and we can't afford to lose that.
I think you're absolutely right, because this world does need something new, something different. And these kids, and I know this from my own work, being a psychotherapist and working with kids, is that their ability to solve problems in a completely different way is absolutely remarkable. Like, I'm so fortunate to be able to do what I do and work with a lot of kids who have ADHD, who have autism, and they do stuff where like I could not even imagine. Like, they play Jenga in a completely different way that I've never seen it being played like that. I have, a 3-year-old who is all over the place, like the parents concerned, okay, your office is going to be a chaos. But when he got interested in doing these tiny, I have these deck techs, they have tiny little screws and tiny little bolts that the way you put it together, this 3-year-old was able to do that all by himself. And I just sat there in awe. And this is really like a reverence to the abilities that these kids have, and that I think your message is so important, that we have to nurture that.
Yeah.
So how do we do that as a parent? How do we nurture these special gifts and talents and differences? So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, a lot of my work with parents is to help them recognize that there is nothing wrong with their child. And that takes a lot of work, because we have to really let go of our expectations for what we thought this journey was going to look like and who our child would be. And we have to just open up our minds to what's possible. And so I think that is the first step. It's to kind of really start questioning everything. What does success look like? What does a typical childhood look like? And is that really what is going to serve my child best? Should I be trying to get this child into this school or back on track? Or should I instead follow their lead and see where their own interests can take them? So there's a lot of just like rewiring that we as parents do. And that is a lot of the work that I do. And for these kids, it's so important that they get to spend a lot of time in their strengths, whether that's at home or at school.
Okay,
And,
yeah.
I will say for a lot of these kids, homeschooling ends up being, at least for part of their school life, ends up being a really great model, because a lot of them do hyper focus and have these deep areas of interest. And if you can give them the freedom to really go there, pretty incredible what they can produce and create, and how they can learn within that construct when they're given that sense of agency. So, but I think we really do need to start by, especially as parents, by recognizing, okay, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, but that's okay. Who is my child? How can I learn more about how they see the world, how they learn, what sparks them, and how can I create an environment where they feel safe enough to explore those interests and see where that takes them.
Right, absolutely. I think one thing that comes in the way of parents being able to do that is this fear that my child will fail. If I don't make them somehow go to school, if I don't make them do the homework, if I don't make them read, and the reading is so stressful for everybody, that there's really this fear-based approach to this. So stepping back, letting go, and really trusting the child, and trusting that as long as you nurture the unique gifts of the child, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of any child, neurotypical or not, um, they're all on their own timeline,
That's
right?
right.
And so I think you're exactly right. We can get so stressed and concerned when our child isn't, they're not reading by first grade, or they're not doing this, or they're not tying their shoes. I hear from so many parents who are concerned
Right.
that their child is not tying their shoes. And I'm like, I think it's okay. They're Velcro shoes. This is not going to ruin their life if they're not tying their shoe
Right.
by the time they're 12 or whatever it is. So again, this is the work we constantly have to do. We have to recognize what are our triggers, where are we being sparked by fear about the future, and how can we just recognize, like, we don't have control anyway. We might have the most neurotypical, valedictorian, loves to do school, like student child, and they may not realize, the definition of success that we have. So we really need to question what success looks like. People talk to me about this all the time. I have this kid who's now 15. He's back in school. I homeschooled him for 6 years, and he's back in high school now, loves it. He's been described to me by teachers as a model student, which blows my mind because that was not our experience back when he was in school. But he's been feeling so safe and secure and been able to grow and blossom that now he's ready for so many things. But I will just say, if he ends up being a barista and designing fonts in his spare time and decides I'm not going to go to whatever, it's not my life.
Right.
My goal is for him to feel a sense of self-awareness and self-actualization as an adult. And I'm so sorry about my cat. If I've done that, if he grows up knowing who he is, knowing what makes him happy, and knowing how to advocate for areas where he's challenged, I've done my job.
Right. Really focusing on those internal resources, internal qualities and values of the child versus, making them do stuff that they can, that's difficult. And with the education system, it's in my opinion, it's not really supporting the development of any child.
No, you're exactly right.
Yeah. So this is one of my pet peeves. My big point of frustration is that we have a very, very ancient old education system, while at the same time we have research that we now know in terms of what are the different ways that children learn in different ages. But we have this system that's not coming online. And where I see parents struggling is because they feel like you need to do what the teacher tells you to do. They tell the child, you need to, do what is expected. So can you talk a little bit more about this, like the struggle that differently wired kids have in school, and what are the consequences? Because it's not only academically, but there's a lot of other things that come up, and what are maybe perhaps the outcomes when this goes on for a long time, this negative environment and experience in school, and what can parents do about it?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is that a lot of these kids, especially when they're younger, when their needs are not being met or they're dysregulated because they're spending all day in a classroom where they are being bombarded by sensory information, or maybe they're really rigid thinkers, and so the unpredictability of a classroom environment with a lot of kids and things going on is too much for them, or they're bored, or there's so many things that could be going on. And when they're younger, especially, and they get emotionally dysregulated, it comes out as a behavioral problem. And so there's such an emphasis on classroom management and addressing behavior, and very little attention spent to actually, there's a reason why this child is behaving this way, and we need to discover what that is so we can better meet this child's needs. And so that is the biggest shift that we need to do, is just stop looking at behavior as intentional or purposeful, or that these are bad kids, because when we approach that behavior to fix it, we are crushing them. We're crushing their spirits. We are putting the story in their head that they are bad kids and that there's something wrong with them. And over time, I mean, what does that do to a child who from kindergarten is being sent out of the office or out of the classroom to go sit in an office by themselves or go to the principal's office? Then they get more upset, and then they get punished. And it's just, there's a cycle that just starts. And, Dr. Ross Green has done a documentary called The Kids We Lose, just about this topic. I mean, it's painful. And so that's really where we need to start, is reframe how we are interpreting behavior. And, I'm not a fan of behavioral reinforcement plans or star charts or any of those things, because they're about classroom management. They're not about how can we meet this child's needs and help them get what they need in this environment.
Right. It's all about that external control versus let's build some inner resources and skills in the child to be able to manage this thing. And the sad thing is that oftentimes when we see these behaviors, the child cannot control them, because if they have a sensory processing disorder, it's not up to them how their brain just happens to hear these sounds that is normal conversation voice as yelling or loud or whatever it is, and then they get punished for that. It's really epidemic. It's really sad. I work with a lot of preschoolers, and I have parents because coming to me because preschoolers are getting kicked out of school
Yeah.
at age 2.5 is my youngest one. There is no reason for that.
No, it's devastating. It really is. And
Yes.
I'm not sure if you've read Dr. Mona de la Hook's book, Beyond Behaviors. It's fantastic. And she's really focused on preschool because that is when it
Oh.
starts.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, we had really our first preschool after a month and a half. Asher was 3. We pulled him out because I went to pick him up one day and he was sitting in essentially a closet by himself because he wasn't behaving because he
Oh
got
my
up in
gosh.
circle time. I'm like, he's
Yeah.
not even 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, this kid needs to move. Can he move?
Right.
So there's a lot of education that has to happen. And I feel
Right.
like it is happening, but not fast enough.
Not
And
fast
so
enough. Mm-hmm.
I do believe that most teachers really, they don't know what they don't know, so they want to
That's
do
right.
better. And so that is where there's a lot of just compassionate education that my community of parents, we can play a huge role in, because we have the most at stake, and we are interacting with the teachers and the kids every day.
Right, exactly. And for parents out there to know, my kind of experience is also that parents like just kind of try to push the situation, even though in their hearts they feel like this is terrible for my child. I really don't want them to be in this situation, but I should do that. I should somehow like just figure out a way. And incredible things happen when there is a change of school, or homeschooling also works wonderfully, so that it's okay to do something different, do something that actually works. And for parents to advocate for their children, it's okay to
Mhm.
educate the teacher, to let them know about things that and strategies that might be working. The other
Yeah.
piece in school is the bullying that these kids experience.
Yeah. Yes, and a lot of parents pull their kids out, especially in middle school, because of that very reason. And that's a whole other, that's a whole other area. I really think that is where parents raising neurotypical kids can really play a huge role, because there's a lot of pieces here. There's the culture of the classroom, right, which the teacher really
Mhm.
manages. Um, and if a teacher is bullying a student, which many of them do, shaming a student in front of the classroom is bullying. The
That's
kids
right.
are going to take that lead. So we have to change the classroom culture to one of respect and compassion, starting from the teacher. But even parents of neurotypical kids, if we start from a very young age, like, the kids notice difference. They notice the kid who's running around and can't sit in song circle, or they notice the kid who really lost it when they didn't get called on for something. They're aware of all of this happening. And so we, as parents of neurotypical kids, can also help these kids have context for that. So, you know what? This is a situation that's actually really hard for that child. You want to know why? Because the way that his brain is wired means that when something doesn't go the way he expects, it's kind of like, it's devastating to him. He has this extreme reaction. So, so we can share these messages, and I believe I have this like vision of raising a whole generation of allies who just be like, oh yeah, well, that's Bill. He actually, he gets really anxious in these kinds of situations, so I'm just going to do this to help him out. Like,
Mhm.
that's totally possible, but we need to start talking openly about these things. We need to stop and then I'm putting that on parents of atypical kids. We need to be open about our experiences. We need to stop contributing to the stigma by being secretive. We need to enlist our friends who have typical kids to be our allies and to help their kids better understand our kids. Like we just need to start being more open and continue this educational campaign, because yeah, the bullying, these kids are so much higher risk than bullying than other populations.
Right.
And those effects can last a lifetime, you know?
They do. They
Yeah.
really do. And I love your message that this is actually the way we change the world to be a better place, to be a place where we can respond to each other from a place of empathy, compassion, and supporting each other. And that every single person can contribute to that in their own ways.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I really love that. So before we end here, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the tilt parenting and maybe sharing some tools or skills for or ideas for very like practical, concrete ideas for parents that they can kind of start working on right away with their child.
So, Tilt Parenting is a community which actually launched as a podcast that I created for parents like me, and I actually just released episode 190 today. So there's a lot of
Wow,
content there.
congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. I can't believe I've been doing it for almost 4 years, but I interview parenting experts and authors and other parents. And my son has done 20 episodes with me when he was
Wow.
younger. So there's a lot of just really great content there to help parents kind of get access to the experts they would want. And organically from that has grown a community of parents really around the world who are connecting and kind of finding their voice, which has been so exciting. And you know what I offer on this site, and in my book I have 18 tilts, and these are really just reframes, that like little tweaks that we can make in our thinking that can change our experience. So I'm not going to tell you how to, you know, get your kid out of the door on time, you
Mm-hmm.
know, after asking, you know, 10 reminders, or get them off their computers, or all these things. Like, I'm not going to give you those strategies. What I do and what my tilts do is help parents start to recognize their own thinking that's keeping them stuck. So,
Right.
for example, you know, one of the tilts is about really kind of recognizing your own personal triggers, so that we can start being proactive and knowing, okay, these are things that really get on my nerves. This is where I'm going to blow it. So how can I proactively plan for this so that I don't contribute any energy to this scenario that's going to result in explosion? So a lot of my strategies are about finding more peace in the day to day. A lot of it is about just kind of letting go of the expectations that we had, and instead really leaning in to who our child is.
Mm-hmm.
And because that is where the most pain is, right? That disconnect between
Right.
our expectations and what our reality is.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just even as one tip, one of the things that I would encourage listeners or viewers to do is just start noticing those phrases that they are saying over and over again, like, I can't believe this is happening again, or why does she always do that, or oh my gosh, her backpack is a disaster, or this is always going to be hard, or no one ever understands this, or no one will ever get my child. You know, we have these voices in our heads that just replay. So I encourage parents to write some of those down, the biggest hits, the greatest hits list, I call it, and take them one by one and see what kind of evidence you can come up with for a better thought that you can
Right.
replace that. So when you go to that default thought, you can be like, actually, I know it's not always going to be hard because we just had a great day the other day. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm noticing a lot of growth, and that felt really great. So, um, so this is the kind of work that I do, and that I
Great.
provide for parents, is just helping them kind of take charge of their experience not feel like a victim, not
Mhm.
feel like they have no choice, but actually recognize you have a lot of choice in how you choose to experience this, and the meaning you choose to make out of your, you know, your daily reality.
Right. And it starts with us. It starts with the parents versus let's change something in the child. So really I hear this message of like, let's accept the way things are right now. Let's enjoy the relationship we have with our children exactly the way they are. Let's go for a treasure hunt of
Mhm.
their unique, precious gifts that they all have. So
Yeah.
really powerful message. I love that. We're going to start wrapping up the interview with that. So yeah, definitely. There's lots of free resources there. There's the podcast. There's other things on the Tilt Parenting website. And then you have a free gift for all the viewers as well. What do you have in mind?
So I have, it's a differently wired 7-day challenge. And so this is something that you'll get a little video from me every day, like really short. So it's not, I'm not about big, overwhelming homework. This is about
Mm-hmm.
a little, here's one little idea that I want you to ruminate on today,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's about being more intentional or looking for a bright spot. And so for 7 days, you'll get a little video with kind of a challenge on a little tweak that you can make in your thinking.
That's great. And I think that's what is so much needed is just little bite-sized snippets of information and then kind of scaffolding and building from there. That's the most most powerful way to do that. So I appreciate and thank you for doing that and offering this generous gift. And thank you for all the work that you are doing in raising awareness of this and really making this world a little more inclusive. I think it's
Thank you.
absolutely vital that we do what we can in our own ways to contribute to that.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity to share with you today.
Yeah, of course. So thank you everyone so much for listening to the Becoming a Peaceful Parent Summit. I will see you all tomorrow. Bye now.